They thought my daughter was just a naive, penniless girl they could discard in the snow when she became inconvenient. They left her 8 months pregnant, freezing on a mountain road, thinking she had no one. But the Sterlings made one fatal, catastrophic mistake. They didn't know who I was. My name is Margaret. For the last 24 years, I have lived a quiet, unassuming life in a small, leafy suburb in upstate New York. To the world, I was just a widowed mother who ran a moderately successful antique shop on Main Street. I wore oversized knit cardigans, baked pies for the neighborhood block parties, and poured every ounce of my soul into raising my daughter, Camilla. Camilla was my light. She was gentle, fiercely empathetic, and saw the absolute best in everyone, a trait that, unfortunately, she did not inherit from me. I saw the world for what it was. I had to, but I sheltered her from my past, from the cutthroat world I had walked away from, because I wanted her to have the one thing I never did, a simple, happy life. Then she met Brendan Sterling. Brendan was handsome in that polished, effortlessly wealthy way. He had the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room, but his eyes always seemed to be searching for a mirror. He was the heir to Sterling Enterprises, a ruthless commercial real estate empire based out of Boston. His parents, Richard and Victoria Sterling, were the epitome of high society sharks. They didn't just have money, they weaponized it. When Camilla first brought Brendan home to our little cottage, I could smell the arrogance on him. He looked at my mismatched floral teacups and scuffed hardwood floors with a thinly veiled amusement. But Camilla was blindingly in love. She was 22, finishing her degree in childhood education, and utterly convinced that Brendan was her prince. "He's different, Mom," she would tell me, her eyes shining. "He doesn't care about the money or the status. He just wants me." I held my tongue. I smiled, served the tea, and watched. The nightmare truly began when they got engaged. The Sterlings demanded a dinner. They flew us out to Boston and hosted us at their sprawling, sterile mansion that felt more like a modern art museum than a home. Victoria Sterling sat at the head of the table, dripping in conflict-free diamonds, her face pulled tight by expensive surgeons. She spent the entire evening interrogating me. "An antique shop?" Victoria asked, taking a delicate sip of her vintage Pinot Noir. "How charmingly quaint. And your late husband? Did he leave you a substantial safety net?" "We managed just fine, Victoria," I replied, my voice perfectly level. Richard, cutting into his steak with the aggression of a man signing a hostile takeover, didn't even look up. Brendan has a certain image to maintain. A certain pedigree is expected. We're just surprised by his choice. But we suppose it's a phase. Brendan sat there in silence. He didn't defend Camilla. He just gave her a weak, apologetic smile and patted her knee under the table. That was the moment I knew exactly what kind of man my daughter was marrying, a coward. Despite my warnings, they married. The wedding was entirely hijacked by Victoria. She invited 600 of her closest business associates. I invited my book club. Victoria even wore a pale champagne gown that photographed brilliantly as white. 6 months later, Camilla announced she was pregnant. A little boy. You would think a grandchild would soften the Sterlings, but it only amplified their toxicity. Suddenly, Camilla wasn't just a mildly embarrassing phase. She was an incubator for the Sterling heir. Victoria began making unannounced visits to their apartment, criticizing everything from Camilla's diet to the paint colors in the nursery. A Sterling heir cannot be raised in this environment. Victoria sneered one afternoon, gesturing to the modest, cozy apartment Camilla had meticulously decorated. "We have a wing at the estate waiting." The tension reached its breaking point as Thanksgiving approached. Camilla was 8 months pregnant, glowing but visibly exhausted. Brendan informed her he didn't ask. He informed her that they would be spending the holiday weekend at the Sterling family's remote, ultra-luxury cabin in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado. "It's a family tradition, Camilla," Brendan whined over the phone when I expressed my concern. "It'll be good for us. My mother just wants to bond with the baby." "She wants to bond with the baby. Brendan, not your wife," I told him sharply. "Camilla is 32 weeks pregnant. She shouldn't be traveling to a high altitude in the middle of winter." "Mom, it's fine," Camilla interrupted, taking the phone. Her voice was strained, tired of fighting. There's a private doctor in the nearest town just 20 minutes away from the cabin. I just want to make peace with them before the baby comes. Please, just let me try. I closed my eyes, a deep, unsettling dread pooling in my stomach. Call me every day, Camilla. Every single day. I promise, Mom. I love you. I hung up the phone, and for the first time in 2 decades, I walked into my study, unlocked the bottom drawer of my oak desk, and pulled out a sleek, encrypted satellite phone I hadn't touched since I changed my name. My intuition has never been wrong, and it was screaming. The Colorado cabin was less a cabin and more a $40 million fortress of glass, steel, and stone, perched aggressively on the side of a mountain miles away from civilization. From the moment Camilla arrived, the isolation was weaponized against her. The only people there were Brendan, his parents, his viciously snide sister, Cassandra, and Camilla. The household staff had been given the weekend off for total family privacy. According to the tearful phone calls Camilla managed to sneak to me from the bathroom over the first 2 days, the psychological warfare was relentless. Victoria had brought in a high-powered family attorney under the guise of estate planning for the baby. They cornered Camilla at the dinner table, pushing a terrifyingly thick post-nuptial agreement toward her. It's standard procedure, Richard had barked, pouring himself scotch. You bring no assets to this marriage, Camilla. If you and Brendan ever part ways, we need to ensure the sterling legacy and custody of our grandson remains strictly within the family. Custody? Camilla had gasped, clutching her swollen belly. Brendan, what is this? Brendan had stared at the floor. Just sign it, Chloe. It makes them happy. It doesn't mean anything. But Camilla, my brave, sweet girl, refused. She pushed the papers back and walked away. That was the catalyst. The Sterlings realized they couldn't bully her into signing away her rights to her own child. If she wouldn't bend, they would have to break her. On the 3rd afternoon, the sky over the mountains turned a bruised, violent purple. The local weather alerts were blaring on the television. A massive, historic blizzard was rolling in, threatening to dump 3 feet of snow and plunge temperatures to 20 below zero. Victoria suddenly declared she had a severe migraine and needed a specific prescription medication from the pharmacy in town before the roads became impassable. Cassandra and I will drive the Range Rover, Victoria announced, wrapping herself in a floor-length mink coat. Camilla, you're coming with us. You need to pick up those prenatal vitamins you forgot, and I won't have you sitting around here doing nothing. Victoria, the storm is starting, Camilla protested, looking out at the thick flakes already swirling violently against the floor-to-ceiling windows. And I'm so tired. Can't Brendan go? Brendan is reviewing contracts with his father, Victoria snapped. Get your coat. Now. Reluctantly, wanting to avoid another screaming match, Camilla complied. She zipped up her heavy parka, pulled on her boots, and climbed into the back seat of the Range Rover. Cassandra took the wheel, and Victoria sat in the passenger seat. They drove down the winding, treacherous mountain pass. The snow was falling so heavily it was like driving through a wall of static. The wind howled, shaking the heavy SUV. Halfway down the mountain, miles from the cabin and miles from the town, surrounded by dense black pine trees and an ocean of white, Cassandra suddenly slammed on the brakes. The SUV skidded, coming to a halt on the shoulder of the desolate, unplowed road. What's wrong? Camilla asked, her heart hammering as she looked at the blinding snow outside. Victoria turned around in her seat. Her eyes were devoid of any human warmth. They were the eyes of a reptile. Get out, Victoria said. Camilla blinked, thinking she had misheard over the roar of the wind. What? You heard my mother, Cassandra sneered, gripping the steering wheel. Get out of the car! Are you crazy? It's freezing out there. We're in the middle of nowhere. Camilla cried, panic rising in her throat. This is your last chance, you little gold digger, Victoria said, her voice dropping to a vicious hiss. You sign the papers giving Brendan full custody when that child is born, and a quiet, uncontested divorce. Or you can walk back to New York. I'm not giving up my baby, Camilla screamed, tears spilling over her cheeks. Brendan would never allow this. Victoria laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. Who do you think suggested we take you for a drive? My son is weak, but he knows where his loyalties lie. Now get out! When Camilla didn't move, Cassandra unbuckled her seatbelt, reached into the back and grabbed Camilla by the hood of her parka. At the same time, Victoria hit the child lock release. In the ensuing struggle, they shoved my 8-month pregnant daughter out of the door. Camilla fell hard into a snowbank. Before she could even scramble to her feet, the heavy door slammed shut. The locks clicked. "Wait! No! Please!" Camilla screamed, slamming her gloved hands against the tinted glass. Victoria didn't even look back. Cassandra hit the gas. The heavy tires spun, kicking up a spray of ice and slush directly into Camilla's face, and the taillights disappeared into the blinding whiteout. She was alone. The temperature was 10 degrees and dropping fast. The wind chill made it feel like knives slicing through her clothes. There was no shelter, no passing cars, just a terrifying, lethal white abyss. Shivering violently, her teeth chattering so hard they ached, Camilla dug into her pocket and pulled out her phone. No service. She began to walk. Every step was agony, her boots sinking deep into the fresh snow, her heavy belly throwing off her balance. She walked for what felt like hours, the cold seeping into her bones, numbing her fingers and toes. The tears froze on her eyelashes. She was dying, and she knew it. She prayed, wrapping her arms around her stomach to shield her baby from the freezing wind. Just as the edges of her vision began to darken with hypothermia, she stumbled upon a small, rusted emergency call box on the side of the mountain road, a relic from the 1990s, miraculously still wired. With fingers that felt like blocks of wood, she pried the icy door open and picked up the heavy receiver. It had a dial pad. She didn't call 911. She knew the local emergency services would be overwhelmed by the blizzard, and a snowplow wouldn't make it up this remote pass in time. She dialed the only number she knew would save her. 3,000 miles away in New York, my cell phone rang. "Mom?" The word was barely a whisper, broken by violent, rattling shivers. "Camilla?" I stood up so fast my chair crashed to the floor. "Camilla, what's wrong? Where are you?" They left me, Mom. In the snow. I'm so cold. I can't feel my legs. I'm at a mile marker, 114. Mom, save the baby, please. The line went dead. For 3 seconds, I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. A terrifying, absolute silence descended over my mind. The Sterlings thought they had married the daughter of a nobody. They thought Margaret Gallagher was just a sweet lady who sold vintage lamps. They didn't know that before I was Margaret Gallagher, I was Margaret Vanguard. The Vanguard family doesn't just have money. We own the infrastructure of the country. We own the private security firms, the aerospace logistics, the politicians. I had walked away from my father's empire to escape the blood on his hands, but I had never forgotten how to wield that power. I picked up the encrypted satellite phone on my desk. I punched in a number that went directly to a private airbase in Denver. "This is Vanguard," I said, my voice as cold as the ice currently burying my daughter. "I have a priority 1 extraction in the San Juan Mountains. I want a heavily equipped search and rescue team airborne in 5 minutes. And after you find her," I looked at the framed photo of my smiling daughter on my desk, "I need a team of fixers sent to the Sterling residence. Lock them in." The transition from Margaret Gallagher, the sweet neighborhood antique dealer, to Margaret Vanguard, the ruthless heir apparent to a global shadow empire, took less than 4 minutes. I didn't pack a bag. I simply locked the door of my shop, walked to the vacant lot behind the town's strip mall, and waited. Within 20 minutes, the deafening roar of a modified Sikorsky S-76 helicopter shattered the quiet New York evening. It touched down, kicking up a storm of dead leaves and snow. The side door slid open, revealing Harrison, my father's oldest and most trusted head of security. He was a man made of granite and silent loyalty, and he didn't ask questions. "We tracked the satellite ping from the emergency box, ma'am," Harrison said over the noise of the rotors as I strapped myself into the leather seat. "A specialized Vanguard extraction team operating out of our Denver facility has already been deployed. They are utilizing military-grade snowcats and thermal drone imaging. The storm is a Category 4 blizzard, but they will breach the perimeter." "How long?" I demanded, my hands clenched so tightly my knuckles were white. 10 minutes to her location. I nodded, staring out the window as the helicopter banked hard toward the private airfield where my jet was waiting. "Keep a medical team on standby, the best neonatal specialists in the country. I don't care what it costs, Harrison. If my daughter. I couldn't finish the sentence. The maternal terror was threatening to drown me, but I forced it down, replacing it with something far more useful: pure, unadulterated rage. Miles away, in the San Juan Mountains, the situation was catastrophic. According to the encrypted comms feed I was monitoring on the flight, the temperature had plummeted to minus 15 degrees. Camilla had collapsed. The Vanguard extraction team, led by a former Special Forces operator named Samuel, found her buried under a freshly drifted dune of snow near mile marker 114. The thermal drones had picked up her fading body heat, a faint, flickering orange blob on a screen of icy blue. "Target acquired," Samuel's voice crackled over my headset. "She's unresponsive. Pulse is thready. Core temperature is dangerously low. We have a pregnant female in critical hypothermic shock. Moving to the mobile trauma unit immediately." "The baby, Samuel?" I pressed the comms button, my voice cracking for the first time. "What about the baby?" There was a torturous silence filled only with the static of the storm and the sound of wind whipping against his microphone. "Medical is assessing now, ma'am," Samuel finally replied. "Fetal heart rate is dropping. We are initiating aggressive, controlled rewarming protocols. We are transferring her to the Vanguard Private Trauma Facility in Aspen. You'll meet us there." The flight to Colorado was the longest 3 hours of my life. When I finally burst through the doors of the secure, underground medical facility, it was to a flurry of white coats and frantic beeping monitors. Camilla was in a specialized hyperbaric trauma suite. She looked so small, her skin a terrifying shade of translucent blue, hooked up to a dozen machines pumping warmed fluids into her veins. Dr. Sullivan, a world-renowned maternal-fetal specialist I had flown in from Chicago on an hour's notice, met me outside the glass doors. "Margaret," he said quietly. He knew my real name. He knew who he was dealing with. It was close. Minutes, perhaps seconds. Her body went into extreme preservation mode to protect the child. "She has severe frostbite on her extremities, but we will save her fingers and toes." As for the baby, he offered a tired, tight smile. "He's a fighter. Fetal distress has stabilized. They are both going to survive." I exhaled, my legs giving out for a fraction of a second before I caught myself against the wall. Tears, hot and fast, finally spilled down my cheeks. I walked into the room and sat beside my daughter's bed, taking her heavily bandaged, frozen hand in mine. She didn't wake up until the next morning. When her heavy eyelids finally fluttered open, she looked around the high-tech, sterile room, confusion washing over her pale face. "Mom?" she rasped, her throat raw. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "You're safe. The baby is safe." Tears welled in her eyes as the memory of the whiteout, the locked doors, and the sneering faces of the Sterlings came rushing back. "They left me, Mom, Victoria and Cassandra. They pushed me out, Brendan." He knew. She began to hyperventilate, the heart monitors spiking violently. "They tried to kill me." "I know, Camilla. I know." I stroked her hair, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register, "but they made a mistake." "We have to go to the police," Camilla cried weakly. "We have to tell them." "No," I said, my tone absolute. "The police are bound by laws, bureaucracy, and high-priced defense attorneys. The Sterlings would drag this out in court for a decade. They would spin a story, bribe a judge, and claim you wandered off in a hormonal panic. They would use their money to destroy you." Camilla looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time in her life, she saw past the cardigan-wearing, pie-baking mother. She saw the ice in my veins. "Then what do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt. I pulled my satellite phone from my pocket. "We don't go to the police, Camilla," I said softly. "We go to war. Rest now. Mommy has some business to attend to." While Camilla was fighting for her life in a medically induced coma, the Sterlings were having a lovely evening. According to the audio surveillance my operatives had discreetly planted via drone on their property, they were sitting by the massive, roaring stone fireplace, drinking $3,000 bottles of Bordeaux. "It's a tragedy, truly," Victoria was saying, her voice dripping with mock sorrow as she practiced her statement for the press. "The pregnancy hormones, the altitude." She simply wasn't in her right mind. She demanded we pull over, jumped out of the car, and ran into the woods before we could stop her. By the time we turned around, the snow had blinded us. We searched for hours. "It's the perfect narrative, Mother," Cassandra chimed in, swirling her wine. "Brendan looks like the grieving widower, and we avoid a messy divorce and a custody battle with a commoner. I feel sick about it," Brendan muttered from the corner of the room. "She's out there. She's freezing." "Oh, grow a spine, Brendan," Richard barked, slamming his glass down on the mahogany table. "She refused the post-nup. She was a liability to the Sterling Empire. Your mother did what was necessary to protect our assets. The storm will bury the evidence, and by spring, it'll be a closed case." They were so confident, so arrogantly secure in their glass castle. At 11 p.m., the trap snapped shut. First, the power grid to the mountain was remotely severed. The massive chandelier above the Sterling's heads flickered and died, plunging the opulent room into pitch darkness, save for the orange glow of the fireplace. "What happened?" Victoria snapped. "Brendan, check the breaker." "The backup generator should have kicked in immediately," Richard grumbled, stumbling over an ottoman. It didn't kick in because Samuel had personally ripped the wiring harness out of the massive diesel generator behind the house 10 minutes prior. Then, the cell service dropped. The landlines went dead. The satellite internet dish on the roof was deactivated. They were completely, utterly isolated. The very environment they had weaponized against my daughter was now their prison. Suddenly, the heavy, reinforced oak front door of the cabin didn't just open, it was blown off its hinges with a specialized silent breaching charge. The Sterlings screamed in unison. Before the smoke could even clear, 12 men dressed in tactical winter gear, faces obscured by balaclavas and night vision goggles, flooded the living room. They moved with terrifying, silent precision. Within seconds, Richard was pinned to the floor, Brendan was forced to his knees, and Victoria and Cassandra were backed against the stone fireplace, shrieking in terror. "Who are you? What do you want?" Richard roared, struggling against the zip ties Samuel was securing around his wrists. "Do you know who I am? I'm Richard Sterling. I'll pay you whatever you want. 10 million. 20. Samuel didn't speak. He simply stood up, stepped aside, and illuminated the doorway with a high-powered tactical flashlight. I walked into the cabin. I wasn't wearing my oversized cardigan. I was dressed in a tailored, black wool trench coat, my boots crunching softly over the shattered wood of their front door. I pulled off my leather gloves, finger by finger, and stepped fully into the light of the fireplace. Victoria's jaw dropped. The color completely drained from her surgically tightened face. "Margaret," she whispered, her voice cracking. What is the meaning of this? These men. You." "Hello, Victoria," I said, my voice smooth and eerily calm. I walked over to the mahogany table, picked up her half-empty glass of Bordeaux, and inspected it in the firelight before tossing the expensive liquid onto the roaring fire, causing it to hiss and flare. "You see," I began, pacing slowly around the room, looking at the terrified faces of the people who had tried to murder my child. "You spent an awful lot of money running background checks on my daughter. You looked at our bank accounts, our zip code, our unassuming little life in New York. You concluded we were nobodies, easy targets." "Margaret, please, we can," explained, Brendan stammered, tears streaming down his face as a heavily armed guard pressed a hand heavily onto his shoulder. "Silence," I snapped, the word cracking like a whip. Brendan instantly snapped his mouth shut, whimpering. I stopped pacing and stood directly in front of Victoria, invading her personal space until she was forced to look me in the eye. "You didn't look deep enough," I whispered. "If you had, you would have found that before I married an unassuming high school teacher and took his name, my name was Margaret Vanguard. Does that name ring a bell, Richard?" I looked over at the patriarch of the Sterling family. He was frozen, his eyes wide with a terror that went far beyond the men with guns. In the world of high-stakes corporate power, the Vanguard name was legendary. It was the boogeyman billionaires checked under their beds for. "Vanguard," Richard choked out, his face turning ashen. The Defense Logistics. The shadow firm. "The very same," I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. "My father was a monster, Richard. I left his empire to raise my daughter in peace. I spent 24 years hiding the monster inside of me. But you had to go and wake her up. She jumped out, Cassandra shrieked, panic breaking her composure completely. Camilla went crazy. She jumped out of the car. We couldn't stop her. I moved so fast it shocked even my own security detail. I grabbed Cassandra by the lapels of her silk blouse and slammed her hard against the stone fireplace. She gasped, the air rushing from her lungs. My daughter, I said, my face inches from hers. My voice, a demonic, vibrating hum, is currently in a trauma center, recovering from severe hypothermia because you and your wretched mother shoved her out of a moving vehicle in a blizzard. I have the audio recording of you planning your alibi. I have the thermal footage of her dying in the snow. And I have the power to make your entire family vanish from the face of the earth without a single headline being written. I released Cassandra, letting her slide to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I turned back to Richard and Victoria, who were now trembling so violently they could barely sit upright. The illusion of their power had been shattered in less than 5 minutes. They weren't sharks anymore. They were chum. So, I said, pulling a thick manila envelope from inside my coat and tossing it onto the table, we are going to do some estate planning of our own. I slid the heavy manila envelope across the mahogany table. It stopped perfectly at the edge, teetering just inches from Richard's bound hands. The only sound in the cavernous room was the crackle of the fireplace and the pathetic, ragged breathing of Brendan, who was still kneeling on the floor under the heavy hand of my security operator. "What is this?" Richard rasped, his eyes darting from the envelope to the silent, armed men surrounding his family. "This," I said, unbuttoning my trench coat and taking a seat in Victoria's plush armchair, "is the consequence of your arrogance. Inside that envelope are 3 documents prepared by Arthur Pendleton, senior partner at the most ruthless corporate litigation firm in Manhattan, a firm that incidentally is on my payroll." I leaned forward, the firelight catching the cold steel of my gaze. Document number 1 is an irrevocable relinquishment of all parental rights. Brendan will sign it. He will never see, contact, or claim my grandson. Document number 2 is a decree of uncontested divorce, granting Camilla sole physical and legal custody, along with a lump sum alimony payment of $50 million for emotional distress and endangerment. $50 million! Victoria shrieked, her voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. "You're insane! We will fight you in every court in this country. We are the Sterlings." "You were the Sterlings," I corrected her gently, almost pityingly. Which brings me to document number 3. I pulled a sleek tablet from my pocket, tapped the screen, and placed it on the table facing Richard. It displayed a live ticker of the Asian financial markets, alongside a series of urgent, red-flagged emails from his own chief financial officer. "While you were drinking your vintage Bordeaux and laughing about freezing my pregnant daughter to death, I was making calls from my jet," I explained, watching the blood drain completely from Richard's face as he read the screen. "You see, Richard, Sterling Enterprises is heavily leveraged. You rely on massive lines of credit from institutions like Goldman Sachs and Oak Tree Capital to fund your commercial developments. The Vanguard family controls the shadow infrastructure that underwrites those institutions." Richard began to tremble, a deep, full-body shake. He understood. "At 10 p.m. tonight, I had your credit lines frozen," I continued, my voice a rhythmic, hypnotic drumbeat of doom. "I initiated a hostile buyout of your primary debt holders. Furthermore, I released a sealed dossier to your board of directors detailing your offshore embezzlement in the Cayman Islands. They held an emergency midnight vote. As of 20 minutes ago, you have been ousted as CEO. By the time the New York Stock Exchange opens on Monday, Sterling Enterprises will be entirely insolvent. You are bankrupt, Richard." No, 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 Richard choked out, tears of sheer panic finally spilling over his wrinkled cheeks. "You can't do this. Decades of work. To my legacy." "Your legacy is a corpse," I said coldly, "unless, of course, you sign document number 3. A complete transfer of your remaining controlling shares into a blind trust managed by me for the sole benefit of my grandson. You will walk away with a modest pension. If you refuse." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was suffocating. I take the thermal drone footage of Camilla dying in the snow, the audio recording of your premeditated alibi, and I hand it over to the FBI. You won't just be poor. You will all spend the rest of your natural lives in a federal penitentiary for conspiracy and attempted murder. I'll sign it. The scream came from the floor. Brendan was sobbing, crawling toward the table on his knees, begging against the grip of the guard. I'll sign whatever you want, Brendan wailed, his handsome face contorted in ugly, cowardly terror. I didn't want to do it, Margaret. I swear. It was my mother's idea. Victoria forced her out of the car. Cassandra drove away. I told them not to. I'll testify against them. Just please, don't put me in prison. I can't go to prison. The room fell deathly silent. Victoria stared at her golden boy, her jaw unhinged in absolute horror. Cassandra began to weep uncontrollably, burying her face in her hands. The Sterling family, built on a foundation of ruthless superiority, had crumbled into dust the moment the pressure was applied. They were eating each other alive. It was the most pathetic display I had ever witnessed. Cut his zip ties, I ordered Samuel. Samuel stepped forward, slicing the thick plastic binding on Brendan's wrists. Brendan scrambled up, grabbed the solid gold pen from the table, and frantically began signing his name, essentially erasing his existence from his child's life and selling out his parents in a matter of seconds. He shoved the papers toward his father. Sign it, Dad. Do you want to die in a cage? Sign it. Defeated, broken, and stripped of his empire, Richard Sterling took the pen. His hand shook so violently he could barely form the letters. Victoria just sat against the fireplace, staring blankly at the wall, a hollow shell of the tyrant she had been an hour prior. Once the documents were signed and secured in my coat, I stood up. The power grid to this mountain will remain disabled, I told them, pulling my leather gloves back on. The storm is projected to last another 48 hours. There is enough firewood to keep you from freezing, assuming you know how to tend a fire. The Vanguard extraction team will leave you now. I suggest you use this time in the dark to reflect on your life choices. I turned my back on them and walked out into the blinding, swirling snow. The helicopter was waiting. As we lifted off, leaving the dark, silent cabin buried in the whiteout, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. The monster inside me had done its job. Now, it was time to be a mother again. 3 weeks later, in the warm, sunlit recovery wing of my private estate in New York, Camilla gave birth. He was a beautiful, healthy baby boy with a loud set of lungs and a shock of dark hair. We named him Leo. Camilla sat in the rocking chair, gazing down at her son, wrapped in a soft cashmere blanket. The physical scars of the frostbite were healing, but the emotional ones had transformed her. She was no longer the naive girl who thought love could conquer toxic cruelty. She was a vanguard. She was unbreakable. On the television in the corner of the room, muted on a news channel, a headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Sterling Enterprises collapses amidst fraud scandal. Former CEO Richard Sterling faces federal indictment. I walked over, handed Camilla a cup of warm tea, and turned the television off. We didn't need to watch. The past was dead, buried under 3 feet of Colorado snow. Our future, however, was just beginning. Some people believe power is measured in bank accounts and zip codes. The Sterlings learned the hard way that true power is the primal, terrifying force of a mother protecting her child. They tried to bury my daughter in the ice, but they forgot one crucial detail about the winter. The snow eventually melts, and what lies beneath will always rise to the surface to claim its due.